The thought that I tell my teams, that I think about personally is, what if today was the day I was supposed to win and I didn't show up? Because there's always that day. There's the day where Uber goes from becoming a silly black car service to the thing that we all rely on. There's a day when this piece of plastic goes from a phone, the iPhone, and it takes over BlackBerry. And what if today was the day that everything you had done, all your failures, all your successes, all your learning, all your growth, everything, resilience multiplied, has come together to say, it's this one conversation, it's one interaction in an elevator or on a stage or in a taxi. And all of a sudden, this is the day when you got your break. But you decided you weren't willing to fail, and you decided that you had enough and you just didn't show up. And I think for all of us, that would be the biggest sort of casualty. Not sure who said it, but the saddest words in the English language, what might have been.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the CEO podcast. I'm your host, Mario, together with my co-host and partner, Professor Robert Harwell. Today's guest, Dan Waldschmidt, CEO of Panzura and a vivid ultra runner, which I find fascinating. Dan, welcome to the show.
I'm excited to be here.
So let's introduce yourself. Give us a little bit on your background. Where did you go to school?
Where are you from?
Where are you from?
Where were you born?
Yeah. So I was born just right outside DC in Woodbridge, Virginia, to a father who spent 35 years working in the federal government, Pentagon, and saw sort of everything from pre-Reagan all the way through. He was deputy secretary under George Bush during 9/11. He was then deputy secretary of the Army, and then he was one of the deputy secretaries of the National Security Agency up at Fort Meade, Maryland. And so, I hear a lot of people talking about, maybe government workers or, overpaid and underwork, but nothing could be further from the truth for someone like my father. He probably made maybe $100,000 a year when I was 21. And my first sales job, right out of school was making six digits plus and running with it. And so I saw a guy who would get up in the morning at 4:30, drive to the office, be there all day, come home for my soccer games, and drive that work ethic that was across his religion and his spiritual life to his exercise. He's the one who got me into running and then reinforced these behaviors that were Waldschmidt's, and we do things that are extraordinary. I'm expecting you to do that. And so that sort of stayed with me and put the beginnings of the thought process in my head that I was put on the sword to be extraordinary. That didn't mean I wouldn't have problems, that my problems would be bigger, that my stress would be higher, but that my resilience would need to exceed whatever obstacles were in front of me. The natural bend, I guess, was towards running. It's an individual sport, right? There's no one to blame. There's no pass you can catch or a ball that's overkicked or overthrown. It's just you and your shoes. And it's simple too. I kid all my friends. I live here in Greenville, South Carolina, where Lance Armstrong's, basically team leader lives. And so there's a huge cycling community in Greenville. And I always joke with all my cycling buddies, you need a bike and shoes and helmets and lights and inner tubes. And for me, I need a pair of running shorts and shoes. Don't even need a shirt, right? Out you go and you're hitting the trail running. And so that's ultimately how I got into ultra running. Is you start asking yourself, what's bigger, what's better, what's longer, what pushes my perceived limits? And then what if I were to overcome it? Of course, it starts with 25 milers and 30 milers and 50 milers and 100 milers. And I think last year I did a 200 miler and I'm scheduled to do a 500K. Ooh. But ultimately, there's a race. It's in the United States. It's in New York City. The Sri Chinmoy Ultra Marathon. It's 3,100 miles over 40 or 50-ish days. And no American has ever won it. It's always a bunch of Europeans.
You remind me a little bit. I don't know if you know a comedian from UK called Eddie Izzard. A few years back, Eddie ran one marathon a day for each year Nelson Mandela was in prison. So he ran I don't know how many consecutive marathons. Like he said, at day 15, 16, I can't feel my legs. There is nothing. I am done. But he persevered and he finished what he wanted to do.
What's actually interesting about that is that so much of what we experience or feel or think is mental.
Yes.
And it's in moments like that where you do. I mean, I can fully translate that where you're like, I see my foot hitting the ground, but it's numb. And, I did a 200 miler last year. I was 75 miles in and I was like, I fell on some rocks and I was like, oh, this doesn't sound good. My ankle swelled up and I was maybe a day and a half into this race. Ultimately took me 2.5 days. And so I finished running the extra 125 miles. And then I eventually went to the doctor. He said, yeah, you broke your ankle and we got to put this all back together. But it's amazing what your body can do when you sort of just say, look, I'm going to have to die before I leave this course, right? Before I leave this mission, even though I'm 75 miles into a 200-mile race. And what's interesting about that is I'm nobody special. Anyone who knows me will tell you I'm not any smarter. I don't have any better financial skills. I don't have any sort of secret charm, where I can walk into a room. I'm an introvert, an INFJ. I sort of just want to read books, go running, and do extraordinary art. So tapping into that has nothing to do with skill. It's all to do with will. And once you understand that, I think maybe it was Henry Ford who said, the greatest discovery a man makes is when he realized that which he thought was impossible is actually possible, right? Once you tap into that inner reserve, you start realizing that maybe everything I've told myself about what I can do or what I should do are things that I actually was destined to put on this earth to actually do.
Interesting you mentioned ultra running. So my guess is it kind of shaped your both resilience and determination. So since this is the CEO podcast, what advice would you give other CEOs on, let's say, harnessing their personal passions in their professional or leadership roles?
I would say do things that make you uncomfortable and do those things deliberately, realizing that they may never be comfortable. And that just because you feel like this is hurting or this is not easy doesn't mean you should stop doing it. It just means it doesn't feel easy and it doesn't feel comfortable. We didn't do things that were automatic. There's so many parts of our lives that would be underdeveloped. And so I think pushing yourself in ways that you might not have thought were possible, whether it's, CrossFit or running or cycling, or it could just be a hobby or an art or something you do that, just requires you, right? Your personal investment in it is something that provides these magical qualities of, I did it over here in this one area of my life. Surely I can bring those skills to my CEO-ship.
Well, I think that's a great point. I'm the author, you may not know, of a book called Masterful Coaching. The subtitle is about become the leader your business needs in the process of realizing an impossible future. The coaching perspective we take is, coaching is about helping people achieve the impossible, not the predictable. But in order to be able to do that, you have to be a different kind of person that you usually run across in the boardrooms of most companies or in the CEO's chair of most companies, who over the years I've noticed who for the most part go for the predictable versus the impossible future. I like your comment about be willing to go for a goal or a purpose that's big enough to make you uncomfortable, not just one that is in your comfort zone. I always say there's danger in the comfort zone. So we're aligned on what you were saying. And I was interested in your comments about your father working in the government, because I spent a lot of time coaching people in the Pentagon, the Undersecretary of the Navy, and basically the COO of the Pentagon. And when I was there, I got to meet a lot of admirals and generals doing 360 feedbacks for the secretary. Yeah. And I found that there was something different about them than the run-of-the-mill CEO that I would run into. And most CEOs are interested primarily in power and money. And these guys in the military or in government were interested in a higher order of things, patriotism, for example. It sounds maybe old-fashioned, but they stood for something greater than themselves, even though they were probably also interested in power and money, but they stood for something higher than themselves.
Yeah, there's something magical about that quality, isn't it? It's in CEO-ship, we often call that servant leadership. But if you chase money, you'll find it, especially if you're driven enough. But if you chase destiny, you'll find that as well. And the difference with destiny is it's not just you who makes money or has a life-changing impact. It's everyone around you, right? It's like Euclides, the Greek scientist who sat in a bathtub full of water. And when he sat in the bathtub, the bathtub overflowed, all the water went on the floor. And he said, oh, wow. So two objects in the same spot, displace each other. And I think for so many of us in leadership, I'm never going to be inspirational unless my bathtub is full. And then I can overflow to everyone around me. And I think that sense of purpose is what you were just talking about, is that sense of purpose and destiny and mission and a pursuit more than just, did I get my bonus check, right? Did I get equity that makes me a multi-billionaire, right? Is it something bigger than that?
I think that the experience you had of being an ultra runner, I heard you climb Mount Everest and do 200-mile marathons. I think that gives you an opportunity to test your mettle in something outside of business, as you said, you could bring into your CEO-ship in the great game of business. I don't think most people have that experience.
They get the opportunity, they usually avoid it.
Yeah.
Right. So there's an obstacle that comes, and then you have this moment where if you're not true to yourself, you equivocate, you blame, you scapegoat. Instead of saying, I'm here, what do I do? Right. Part of the magic of me running every day or almost every day, is that I'm listening to books. And I rarely listen to business books. It's almost always biographies. I just was listening to Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom, Mario, and talking about running, 27 years behind bars. Like most of us can't go 27 minutes with a stressful item, and here's a guy who spent, 27 years trying to figure this out. And so you learn, how to contain pain. You learn how to manage your emotions. You learn how to fight through whatever your body is telling you it should do, trying to protect you. And you never reach the outer limits of what's possible. And that's an indication that it's probably happening for most of us in our life.
The great leaders become leaders in the process of reading books about other great leaders. That's where they get the inspiration. They didn't become leaders by studying PowerPoint presentations or reading best-selling books by CEOs. So what are some of the other biographies that you read that inspired you?
So I had a bit of an unfair advantage. I should probably roll back because you asked where I came from. So I was raised in a home, 18 years, no TV. So I had no TV at all, not even like cable outlets in the wall where you would plug in your jack and all that stuff. So I had to read a book a day. And my mom said, you're not going to read novels because you're basically reading fiction. It's a waste of your brain power. You're going to read biographies. So I started to read biographies early on. And, even now, most recently, I'm reading Truman's book. And this last week, I was reading Nono's book about the ultimate boss of the mafioso here in the United States. And there's just so much richness you learn about what it takes to build teams and what loyalty really means to a cause and to a mission to others. I was reading a month ago about MacArthur and his battle with Truman, right? I've read multiple books about Churchill and Grant and a lot of our presidents. And you learn what I call the in-between. Most of us live our lives in what I call the not yet zone. I'm exercising, but I'm not yet in shape. I'm saving, but I'm not yet rich. I'm leading, but I don't see many people following, right? And so if you allow yourself to view the success of your life by where you are in the not yet zone, then you end up quitting and giving up on things that could be, destiny changing. And so it's in every single one of these stories, like you said, every single one of these great men went through times of uncertainty, right? If you read Michael Singer's book, The Surrender Experiment, he's the founder of WebMD, built this $7 billion empire. And then his partners went and stole money from him and basically embezzled money and made it look like him. And here he is going to jail after living this life of high integrity. And it all ended up working out. But you read these stories of it works out at the end, but like sales or revenue or profits, those are all trailing indicators. The last thing that you find out is, I'm out of trouble. But how do you live a life in trouble when you shouldn't be in trouble, or in stress when you shouldn't be in stress? And what you learn is it takes being uncomfortable and knowing how to live with that discomfort.
One question I wanted to ask you was, you hold yourself to a very high standard. You're the CEO of a company. How do you react when people come up with reasons and excuses?
Especially your executive team, right? So how do you handle those situations?
So I have two values that I care deeply about. One is accountability. The second is kindness. And if you're going to build loyalty across a long period of time with executives, and kindness matters. So you can say what you mean without being mean. Just because you're the CEO or have a C in their title doesn't mean you get the right to be a jerk. And a lot of the lessons we discuss and talk about with candor and being candid and say what you mean are really excuses for grown people to act like children. And so it's a long answer to say, I think you just say what you mean, which could be something like, hey, I've seen you perform at a high level. These two things were not at a high level. And so that activity is trash. It's horrible. It's not what we do. However, I'm not calling you trash or horrible. I'm saying this result is not what we want. How do we figure it out together? What is it that we can do that makes this be potent again? And it's that level of consistency, clarity. This is not the standard. And then, by the way, of course, I publicly and privately have to live that standard and hold myself accountable when I don't hit the mark, right? No one gets a break. We all hold each other. Part of what makes this a little more clear is we stop thinking about our companies as families. Oh, we're a family. We're not a family. You mentioned Bill Belichick earlier, Mario. We're a team. And a team, even sometimes you take Tom Brady and you bench him for a quarter, or, you make an example of him to get him angry and upset. Nothing drove the Patriots to win that last big Super Bowl than Deflategate, right? Where people are like, look, you want to put us in a box? You want to make up lies about what we're doing with footballs? We'll show it to you. We'll win the most competitive championship in the world, right? And we'll do it in back-to-back years again.
Kim Scott, I know you mostly read biographies, but Kim Scott's book, Radical Candor, immediately came to mind when you talk about it.
It's a great platform. When I read books like this, and I've got notepads everywhere, all over my desk and next to me, around me, where when I see things, I can write them down and then use them. One of the lessons I've observed in my own behavior and in fellow leaders is we don't provide the tools to be successful. We don't give ourselves the tools. If I were building a house, and I said, hey, I'm going to build a house over here. And you showed up a month later and I didn't have, a bulldozer to knock down trees. I didn't have some sort of digging equipment to put in a foundation. You'd be like, what are you doing? Well, I'm building a house. Well, how are you building a house? Well, I'm just going to build it. You need the tools to do that. So for example, we need to feed ourselves with tools to be successful. So when someone comes to me on my team and says, oh my gosh, these executives are trash. No one cares. This is horrible. My immediate reaction could be to get spun up, or I could use a tool that I've used for years, which is one of two phrases. Tell me more. Just a statement. Tell me more. Well, the second thing is, what makes you say that? Right? So it doesn't matter what anyone says. You did a fantastic job. Instead of saying, oh, yes, I did, I might say, well, tell me more. I'm not sure what actually happened, or what makes you say that, or in integrating tools into our leadership practice and enable us to de-escalate situations and leverage a moment for group growth.
Robert loves using tell me more.
Well, it's a good question. I was thinking, if I were somebody like you, and I have a very high standard, someone doesn't keep my standard, inside I might be furious. How do you manage yourself in these situations? Tell me more, they'd be a good tool, but people might be intimidated by working for someone who has such high standards.
And also, I'll pal up just a little bit to make the conversation a little uncomfortable. Is the tell me more you buying time to kind of get composure, or you really, really want to learn more?
Yeah, so let me answer the first question, is the high standard, and then we'll talk about the tool. So one, all of that's my fault. Jocko Willink in his book says, there are no bad teams, only bad leaders. So ultimately, I have to realize every problem in Panzura is a Dan Waldschmidt problem. Dan Waldschmidt created, Dan Waldschmidt tolerated, and Dan Waldschmidt continued problem until it's resolved. It's 100% my fault, all of it. The second thing is, I have the privilege of having the best people in my company. If I've hired them, and you would assume that I've already vetted out that they could play the game at that level. And then that I have the ability to coach them, build credibility with them, and keep them motivated to keep playing the game at that level. And so it's a matter of introspection when they don't do. The first thought has to be, what am I doing to cause this? Is there a lack of clarity? Is there a lack of desirability, a lack of scalability, a lack of desirability? What am I doing that's enabling a leader to think that an elite activity does not require elite effort or outcomes? So I start with me. And then the second thing is to identify that it's probably not the person, it's likely the effort or the outcome, the evidence that I see. And so then it's to isolate that and just to say that was horrible. Let's just state it. That is a failure. I don't like it. You don't like it. What do we do to fix it? And these conversations, turn into some really healthy discussions.
I love this. Sorry to intrude, Dan. I love this because things that we can control are our actions and systems and processes. That we cannot control the outcome because the outcome is, as the word says, outcome of the systems and processes that have in place. So if I'm not happy with the outcome that I'm getting, it means that somewhere here is the problem. Outcome is not the problem. Problem is everything that happens before.
So there's 5 things that we can control. And if you're a control junkie, like most of us are, that's hard to really embrace. But I believe there's only 5 things in life that I will ever control. Number 1 is how I start the day. Number 2, how I end the day, my diet, my exercise, and then the 5th one is how I handle conflict. Those are the 5 things that I can control. And so how do I, with mastery, own all 5 of those? So people talk about having a morning routine. Well, it really matters if it's 1/20th of the things you can control, and have an end of the day routine where that's now 40% of what you can control, right? 2/5. So as you move through this, you start thinking about what you can control, what you eat, how you exercise. The big one for a lot of us is conflict, but how you handle conflict, what's going on in your head, is often controlled by what's going on in your body, right? We know that an elite chess champion can burn as many calories as someone exercising over 10 hours, right? Why are they dehydrated? They're just sitting in a chair, right? Why are they calorie deficient? They're just sitting in a chair because their brain is consuming massive amounts of energy for us. So look, if I've not done my work to keep my body fueled, there's no way I can keep my mind fueled, right? And so that, without spending our entire conversation on that, I would just encourage people to dig a bit deeper into that. How do you start the day? How do you end the day? One quick lesson I'll put in here as someone who's a high achiever, and this goes to your question about what do you do, is practicing forgiveness. The number one person I have to forgive is myself. I am tougher on myself than anyone will ever be. Yeah. You cannot speak to me meaner than I will speak to myself. You cannot hold me to a higher standard than I hold to myself. You do not know my weaknesses more than I know my own weaknesses. I am brutal. So one of the things I practice each day is forgiving myself. Forgiving myself for being human, for being flawed, for making mistakes, for hurting other people with my actions, my words, and then to practice forgiveness for those around me. Could be an ex-wife, it could be an employee who really pissed me off. And I go, look, I forgive you. That's your best moment. You can do this with regularity. You start developing norms where it's easier to forgive. Doesn't mean you forget, doesn't mean you tolerate mediocrity. What it does is it allows you to meet people where they are, which is humans. And humans have bad days. And we should not be measured by one day's bad performance, nor should we celebrate one day as the totality of our lives. This is where I think these tools come into place for me. I don't want to have to ask people for forgiveness because it's embarrassing. I look like a fool. I feel like a fool. And it's not, I want to perform at a high level consistently. And so I need tools to help me do that. That say, be curious, right? I have Post-it notes that remind me of the key things that I'm working on. The front of my phone, it doesn't have a picture. It's got a couple steps that remind me to let things go, right? Let things go, to not feed that chip on my shoulder that says you're never going to be good enough. It's always someone else's fault. To let other things go so that I can thrive, right? If you read James Clear's book on Atomic Habits, and he does some amazing work distilling down habit forming. And a lot of the reasons why we don't have healthy habits is not so much that we don't know what to do, it's that we aren't doing the micro steps that lead to macro change, right? Stop trying to worry about running. Just take your exercise clothes and put them by the front door.
Yeah. Yeah. I had issues with very unhealthy relationship with food. And I was supremely overweight. So when I began and I lost 40 kilos, which is, I don't know, 1,000 pounds? I don't know. Yeah, about 100 pounds. Yeah, I'm joking. In the last 3 years, right? And piggybacking on what you said, I read it in Atomic Habits. And I said, all right, well, first thing I'm going to do is I will just remove one food from my diet, like milk. And then the next month, I'll remove something else. Oh, pizza. And the next month, I will remove something else, like hamburgers, right? So I really took it step by step, like slowly. And then, as they say, rest is history.
What's interesting about that is, you mentioned Bill Belichick earlier. Yeah. Having these tools is the reason why you pay for a coach. We call it a blind spot. The definition is the word, right? It's something you can't see. It doesn't mean you don't want to see it. It doesn't mean you're turning a blind eye to it. It means you can't see it. It's a blind spot. And so, the physics of your eye moving from side to side limit your ability to see something. And so having someone who can see that spot and then say, hey, you might want to think about this, or here's how you target this, here's how you fix this, enhance this. We invest into 401ks, we invest into fitness plans, we invest into gym memberships, we invest into funding, church events or other religious activities. And then when I often bring up with executives about coaching and how you have a coach to lead you, they're often like, oh yeah, I'm part of this group, or I'm part of this association. And look, if you want to get together with other CEOs and drink beers, that's fine. Godspeed. But there's a difference between that and having someone who says, look, if you want to be elite, this is what elite people do. And so you should maybe start working on these skills. And, the CEOs that I emulate, that I really not envy, but I aspire to have some of the qualities that they have. I notice who they pick as coaches, and then often, inquire as to, if I need to work on that area, how do I jump in and fix that skill? I think normally people set standards too high. You don't need to have a coach for 7 years, 5 years. It might be 18 months. And then what that coach brings to you, let's say it's fitness, you figured it out. You lost 100 pounds in 3 years. You might not need the same thing you needed before, right? And you're in a different phase of your life. And so who's the next person you can hire to bring in to round out the edges of your life?
That's right. Does your company invest in coaching for your executive or leaders?
We do. In fact, we have coaches for all 177 employees that we have, and we scaled from 300 down to about 177, got focused on the core software business that makes us unique. And coaching for our team members is something we've done both online and then for some of our senior leaders and actual, physical humans.
Let me ask you, as the CEO podcast, about your business. Tell us a little bit about Panzura. And I know it's one of the questions some of my CEO friends ask about the acid test of whether you're a great CEO or not is not whether you have a vision or a strategy, but does your company make any money? So it can take a crack at those things.
Yeah, so Panzura is a company that goes back to 2008. If you think about the cloud was launched by Amazon in 2006. It made it $1 billion company. In 2007, we had the iPhone, right? In 2008, Panzura came along and invents this really cool technology around hybrid cloud. Storing your files both in your physical office location and in the cloud and doing it seamlessly. Okay. I won't go into all the nerdy details of what makes us the industry leader in our category, but it's really amazing. 40 some odd patents later into what we do. It's very neat. I was brought in by the board in 2019 to help advise a growth strategy. 3 CEOs, 4 marketing teams hadn't figured it out. As there are a bunch of Silicon Valley companies like that, right? Great technology, but maybe not a great business. We ended up buying the company a year later and then began a turnaround effort. And so that led us on a path to where we are now, where we'll be cash flow break even in October. and still growing at a healthy clip year over year, Inc. 5,000 back-to-back years, a bunch of other awards. Awards don't often illustrate if you're a quality business or not. Now, there's a number of factors that include things like culture. And as you mentioned, are you actually making money? Yeah. Otherwise, it's just sort of a fancy hobby. But we are very focused on a pivot away from a scattered approach of go-to-market to focusing on the biggest companies in the world. We've noticed that our solutions are uniquely used by some of the biggest companies in the world. If you think about gaming, you're thinking about finance, you're thinking about manufacturing, they need fast and secure access to their data, and we do that in unique ways. So instead of a scattered approach that says, we're great for anyone who has a checkbook, we're now focusing our efforts uniquely on enterprise, and this is new muscle memory for us, right? So we're funding programs that drive us to be the leader in the enterprise space.
We talked about this specific sentence before we hit record. Sorry, I want to bring it up and I want to discuss it a little bit. So you said effort is always available while luck is not. And I completely like that. That was the highlight of when I did a little bit of research on some of the articles that either you wrote or you were mentioning. So how can other CEOs instill a culture of effort and resilience, regardless of what is happening in their environment or it's called outside?
Yeah, we've made the word try a 4-letter word. And I think that's a disservice to us as leaders. So it's clever that Nike says, just do it. But there is no doing of anything. You don't just do an art or do a race. Think about how much effort Nike spent and millions of dollars they spent in helping Eliud Kipchoge run a sub 2-hour marathon. He didn't just do anything. He tried and then tried and he failed. They tried again, and tried again. And eventually now there's a documentary about it. And we've made this concept of trying bad, even quoting fictional Yoda, right? As some standard. Yeah, with all of our lives, the greatest leaders have always told us to try, right? Whether it's Vince Lombardi practicing late into the night just to get one play this week, done right, or whether it's Belichick, the greatest coaches in our lives have forced us to try. And that, I think, is the quintessential essence of this word of effort. The harder you try, the luckier you get.
I would argue that the word try inadvertently has become associated with failure for some unknown reason. Like, just try implies I'm maybe off base. And again, forgive me, English is not a second language, but my sense is that if you say try, it implies failure. So
what's wrong with it? We've created ridiculous machismo, chest-thumping sort of standards for excellence that do us a disservice. No one makes fun of a baby because they try and fall and then try to stand again and twirl. In fact, we stand around and cheer. We take pictures and videos and share them with everyone who has an iPhone, right? Of that tremendous journey. We celebrate the try, right? We don't make fun of our 5-year-olds when they play soccer as like one unit, everyone chasing the ball. We're like, look what they're doing. They're putting in the effort to learn something new. And then something happens in the middle of our life where if it's not going to work the first time, we're not going to do it. But if you saw Oppenheimer, it took like 3,000 scientists and 400 tries to build a nuclear bomb. And it took Einstein like lots of tries to figure out his theory of relativity. And it took, we always quote the light bulb, the essence of what it takes to build a light bulb. And it's unrealistic to expect that you're going to just do something the first time. And like, why? Who are you? Who are you that you should just waltz into the universe? And the first time you put in effort, it's magical and correct. Like, who are you, right? That you feel like that's owed to you. It's such arrogance on our part. And there's this humility that comes with trying and this resilience that says, I can't control the universe. I can't even necessarily always control my outcomes, but I can persist. And in that quietness of persistence, I ultimately know I'm going to continue until the try has turned into a win. One thought that I had was this, is I've read so many biographies at Huge Challenge, right? Great leaders, read books about other great leaders. And I aspire to be a great leader. I'm not where I want to be, but I aspire to be. The thought that I tell my teams, that I think about personally is, what if today was the day I was supposed to win and I didn't show up? Because there's always that day. There's the day where Uber goes from becoming a silly black car service to the thing that we all rely on, right? There's a day when this piece of plastic goes from a phone, the iPhone, and it takes over BlackBerry. And what if today was the day that everything you had done, all your failures, all your successes, all your learning, all your growth, everything, resilience multiplied, has come together to say, it's this one conversation, it's one interaction in an elevator or on a stage or in a taxi. And all of a sudden, this is the day when you got your break, but you decided you weren't willing to fail, or you decided that you had had enough and you just didn't show up. And I think for all of us, that would be the biggest, sort of casualty. Not sure who said it, but the saddest words in the English language, what might have been.
I want to go back to your comment. Your business model is to sell data to big companies. I'm not sure if that's the correct way to say it.
That's right.
That sounds simple, but it's not so easy. So what is your methodology for getting your foot in the door when there's so much competition around? Let me preface that a little. There's a guy I admire. His name is Marty Neumeyer. He's a marketing genius. He said, the bigger the market, the more important it is to narrow your niche if you want to distinguish yourself. You set a big business goal for yourself. We talked a lot about things I would put under the category of self-help. But as a business person, you have a data to offer. You've narrowed your niche to big companies. How can you get your foot in the door? What's your strategy, your techniques? Are you succeeding? Are you failing? Or what's happening?
Yeah, Marty's right, by the way. The bigger the market, the more clarity you need. Everyone talks about SAMs and TAMs and throws around these big words. If we only get 1% of this 27 trillion market, we'll be, fabulously wealthy. But getting that 1% is really hard. So for us, there's a whole bunch of cross-functional strategies that we're delivering on. One is working with our channel partners. And those channels actually have, multiple channels. Inside those channels, the marketplaces, when someone goes to AWS and signs up for services, they can just buy our product right through that marketplace, right through Azure or Cisco or Seagate or any of the places where enterprises are going to buy their cloud data. They're finding out about us. When they're also talking to integration providers, everyone from Wipro to Cognizant to Deloitte, Accenture, and they're saying, we need a hybrid strategy that works. They're finding out about us. When they're going to conferences and looking at the latest and greatest around using AI to protect, enhance, and surface next level insights, we're there and they're finding out about us. We're also reaching outbound to, we know our targets, our ideal customer profile. That, as you mentioned, we constantly have to keep reviewing and refining. Is this still our ICP? And what words are they using? What pain points do they have? What are the goals they want to achieve internally? And then how do we package up our use cases and case studies in a way that let them know, if I need this ideal data platform, Panzura is the one for us.
Could you explain that a little more in terms of, let's say I'm a CEO or a CXO listening to this podcast. Dan seems like a really interesting guy, but what job can I hire Panzura to help me do? Can you be a little more specific?
Yeah, there's 3 unique problems that our CIOs face right now. And chief information officers, chief data officers, they have 3 problems that are universal. The first one is data loss. Everyone talks about ransomware, but one of the other problems that large enterprises have is not just ransomware, but data exfiltration. Employees get angry, they download files, they share them with competition. They take files to a new job, or just in general, or insecure with how they handle files, right? It puts the entire company at risk. The second challenge they have is data delivery. Believe it or not, if you're a large manufacturer and you might have 3,000 locations, if you have one file that you need at every location, it is likely you have to make 3,000 copies of that file and share it. We've all gotten an email where there's 30 people all CC'd have one file. That is now 30 copies of the same file placed. And now you've taken your costs from $1 to $30, $1 million to $30 million, right? Creates massive pressure on budgets, which is also a problem because that's problem number 3, which is the spiraling costs of data. Data will grow by 25 to 30% every year just doing nothing. If you just continue your business, it'll grow by 25 or 30%. And then you're acquiring companies and grabbing their data and making it yours. And then you're adding new innovative capabilities like AI. And now you need an AI data silo or data estate. And then what's behind AI is quantum computing, which is, a few years out. Now you're thinking about how you manage that data. So large CIOs are talking about things like digital transformation, but they're struggling with, how do I stop losing data? How do I deliver data to the right location without making copies of it? And then how do I stop the spiraling costs that are mitigating my ability to deliver superior services? Our platform has the most secure sharing, utilization, and storing of data on the planet with those 3-letter agencies as our customers already. We're able to actually share files globally without making copies of them in milliseconds. So it enhances the speed at which you do your business. Third is, because we're compressing, deduping, and compressing across your entire data, leaders now know that their data is not growing by 35 or 40% year over year. It might be growing at 5%, 4%, allowing you to allocate budget towards things you really want to spend money on, like AI, quantum, or other digital transformation steps in your journey.
So my final question, Dan, you did mention AI. What do you see 1 to 3 years in the future happening in that specific space? I did see one quote, and it's been, I think, overshared on the internet. It says, I don't want AI to do art. I want to do art. I want AI to do my laundry and dishes.
Yeah, I love that sentiment. That's a bit of how I feel about it too. What's magical about AI is it used to be that we would outsource to India or Pakistan or even South America, LPO, BPO, business process, legal processing jobs. And these were sort of low value, high quantity, high volume jobs, right? We just took those from the United States when we moved to other parts of the country, manufacturing to China, things like that. For the first time now, we've got the capability to take high-end jobs, legal, accounting, strategic, analysis jobs, and now have, AI solve these challenges for us. What AI can't deliver for us is experience. What AI can't deliver for us is resilience, and it can't deliver on culture. And so I think as leaders, it's, how do we focus on AI to help us do the stuff that we'd have somebody whipping together a presentation on some analysis. I need to figure out how a Dunning-Kruger philosophy impacts my leadership growth. Okay. I don't need to go bring in a specialist to teach me that stuff. I can have AI do that. Now, as far as building a culture where people are eager to learn, that's on us as leaders. Developing a resilience where we try and fail and try again, that's on us as leaders. But I think there's fantastic opportunity to offload a bunch of the sort of the grind that is just unnecessary.
Robert, final thoughts?
I was going to ask you, where do you think you need coaching? What do you try to do as if you were playing golf or you're hitting the ball into the woods and you can't figure out how to hit it straight and hit the wall? Where, if any place, do you feel you need coaching as a CEO, a manager, leader?
Yeah, developing a culture of curiosity is what my current mindset is a bit fixated on. It's easy when you're an expert, or it's almost sort of automatic to make assumptions. I know what's wrong, I can fix it. This doesn't feel right, I'm going to fix it. But developing a curiosity that does force us as a natural reaction to ask that next question. Here's what I think I see. Can you share more? Can you tell me more? Why do you think this happened? And teaching our leaders, frankly, the entire company as a whole, to be curious about our customers, curious about the industry, curious about what we're doing, and let that curiosity drive our innovation rather than coming to the table with preconceived notions, biases, our personal opinions that limit our ability to achieve greatness.
All right. Thank you.
Dan, thank you so much for being a guest. This was a very insightful, very open conversation. I do hope you had a good time with me and Robert. Any final words? Any parting words on your side?
Thanks for having me, and I appreciate the opportunity to learn from you both about this idea of being a leader.
Cool.
So thank you.
And till next time, see you all.